Hello everybody, in this video I'd like to talk about 3 things I love about karate and 3 things I hate about karate. Now before we get into that, we need to be clear there's lots of differing approaches to karate. The term means different things to different people. So not all of these points will apply to every single approach. As a colleague of mine once said, the term karate these days is a little bit like the term athletics. So you could be a shot putter or you could be a marathon runner. And you're both doing athletics, but they're 2 very different pursuits. But with that caveat in place, let's get into it. Let's look at the first thing that I love about karate. So the first thing I love about karate is its holistic nature. Yes, there's a heavy emphasis on striking, kicking and punching, right? But we've also got all that close range striking, the kneeing, the elbowing. We've got the locking, the throwing, the chokes, the strangles. All of this stuff that we see in the old katas, the older textbooks. The old school karate was a much more holistic martial art. Now, that old school karate was kind of done with a view for civilian self-protection. So it didn't really concern itself with dueling skills. But as karate's evolved, it's picked that up too. We have those guards up movement skills, closing the gap skills as well. When you blend that old and new together, you've got a very complete system, which makes it fun to me. Now, of course, karate's not an expert at everything, obviously. There's certain things that other arts do way better than karate does. But that's one of the things I enjoy too. So is there throwing in karate? Yes, there is. There's a lot of it. But we can go with judo players. I did judo for a while to improve and refine that throwing. There's trapping in there as well, so we can work with Wing Chun practitioners of Philippine arts, and look at how they're doing things as well. As a vehicle to explore the wider martial arts, because of its holistic nature, karate has that, and that's something I find hugely enjoyable. As I always say, I'm a martial artist first and a karateka second. So I love karate's holistic nature because it allows me to explore the wider martial arts while giving me that central hub or framework to work from. So yeah, it's one thing I really do love about it. Now, of course, as I mentioned, not every version of karate is holistic. If you're doing sport karate or 3K karate, you're probably only going to be doing the kicking, the punching and the blocking. But when you look at karate in its widest sense, it's so much fun and there's so much depth to it because as a civilian art needs to, for practical purposes. As one of my instructors used to say, you can be a 10th dan on your feet and a white belt on your back. You need some ground skills, you need some gripping skills. And the old school karate has that. So it's one thing I really love about it, is its holistic nature. So another thing I love about karate is feeling part of that tradition. Now, this is a little bit more subjective and it wouldn't be important to everybody, but I really do like looking at my personal lineage, and you can see who taught who, and we can go back as far as history allows us to go back, and to feel like I'm part of that chain of this art as it kind of makes its way through time. I really like that. I like having an art with its traditions and its stories and some historical depth to it. But what I also love about that is it's a living tradition. Now, we'll talk more about this when I get into things I hate, but I think sometimes people tend to think of karate as being unchanging, and it's clearly not. And anyone who's looked at the history of karate will see that not a single generation kind of passed it on exactly as it was taught to them. As time goes on, we take all that great information that the prior generations given us, and we move it on a little bit. It's that old line, I think John of Salisbury said it, if I can see so far, it is because I am as a dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants. Right? We're not reinventing everything from scratch. We're taking the work that the giants did before, but we're moving it along that little bit ourselves. And every generation's done that. It's a living tradition. We see things, that are brought in. Like, for example, a common practice now in most karate dojos is people use focus mitts. Traditionally, they weren't used, but they're a great bit of kit. They didn't have them back then. We have them now, so they become part of what we do. There's also sometimes the less obvious things too, right? Like gis, belts, all that kind of stuff that we regard as being very traditional, aren't really that traditional. They haven't been around that long. Techniques, things like roundhouse kicks, relatively new to karate. It's a strange statistic, but I like pointing out to my students that the time between roundhouse kick first appearing in print, within the karate books, right? So here's roundhouse kick in a book, because it wasn't in the early books. The time between roundhouse kick first appearing in the karate texts and then me as Iain Abernethy learning roundhouse kick, is less time than the first ever UFC and now. So it gives you an idea of how, you ask people to name a karate kick, they're going to go roundhouse. It's a quintessential karate kick. Most people would pick that one, but it's relatively new, as we bring it in. So it's an evolving tradition. You can see this, all the various masters, very few of them had one instructor. They had several. And then they amalgamated together into what they do. And it's one of the things that I like about it. Yes, there's that strong tradition there, but it's a living tradition. So the analogy I like to use for this is, if you think of it like we talk about our historical roots, our roots. Well, think of a tree. What are those roots for? Well, they're to give stability, and they're also to give it new growth. Those roots draw in the nutrients so we can get the new growth. If the tree isn't growing, if it's the same as it was, it's dead. The roots are dead. So I don't want to be part of a dead tradition. I want to be part of a living one. And I think karate is that, always has been that. Now, of course, there are some who do want to kill it in the belief that they are then being very traditional, and we'll get to that more in a moment. But for me, looking at the true history of karate, the fact that it's got that deep traditional roots I really like, and the fact that it's a living tradition, it's still evolving, it's still growing, it's still open to new ideas, but all the while not cutting itself off from what went on before. It's drawing on what went on before. I love that feeling of being part of something traditional. I accept that's a bit more subjective, because a lot of people wouldn't care. They just want to practice a martial art, right? And great. But for me, I like that. That's why the traditional arts appeal, because they have that historical depth. But again, I don't want to be part of a dead tradition. I want to be part of a living tradition. And that's what karate has. It is a living tradition. Now, I accept this one is going to be a little bit more niche, right? But one of the things I love about karate, as I do it, in the circles in which I move, and I accept this isn't representative of karate as a whole, right? But the karate as I do it and know it, and the people around me, when we've got this approach, it's very good at understanding the differences between all the various martial contexts. The differences between self-defense and fighting and the martial arts, the people that I move with, the fellow instructors that I engage with, they get this. They really get this. And as to why that should be the case, because I don't always see this in other martial arts to quite the same degree, accepting that could be because of the circles I'm moving, right? But in the karate circles that I move in, this distinction is clear and common. Now, as to why that may be the case, I think it's because there's no doubt one of the problems karate's had is it's picked up a few oddities along the way. As karate's evolved and different things have moved in, not all of those changes have been positive. So I can think of examples of 3-step sparring, 5-step sparring, all that kind of stuff. It's not really traditional. It's a modern attempt to ape some of the practices of judo and kendo. It doesn't really work, doesn't really go anywhere. There's all that kind of stuff. And a lot of karateka have become quite discriminating about that in the circles I move. So they'll look at objectively at what they do, and they'll go, that doesn't have a purpose. We're not doing it anymore. This could have a good purpose. We'll bring it into what we do. It's part of a living tradition. Now, and I think as part of that, when people objectively look at self-defense, they go, well, what's the problem? And then we'll define the solution. I think that in the karate circles that I move, there's not a lot of dogma, and there's not a lot of being wedded to things just because there's not that sense of having the personal identity so tied up in the martial art. They can look at it objectively and go, this is good, this is not good. So when we're looking at the self-defense side of things, there's a lot of the people I work with, will be very knowledgeable about the nature of violent crime, the home security, travel security, de-escalation skills, knowledges of the law, the dynamics of abusive and controlling relationships, which are all part of it as well. There's that much wider acceptance of what self-defense is, and then it's researched and studied to a high level. And that doesn't stop us from doing all the other stuff as well. So when we're teaching self-defense, when we're talking about self-defense, it's, well, how do we protect ourselves from violent crime in the most effective and broad-based way possible? And then we can also go, and we're doing this because we like the way it makes our body feels. We're doing this because it's good for us physically and mentally. We're doing this because this is a fun skill we can use when we're out dueling a martial artist, but we don't mix it all up. Now, and I'm aware that won't be true of karate in a wider sense. But it's definitely true of karate as I do it. The circles that I move in, the karateka I spend time with, all different, styles of karate, different groups, all that kind of stuff. But it's part of what we do, is that demarcation is generally quite strong. And that's something I love about it, because it means that in any given instance, you're teaching what needs to be taught. You're practicing what needs to be practiced. Are we looking at how to outfight another martial artist? Right. What's the most effective way to do that? And we'll draw the tools from the toolkit that we have that are most useful for that. And when it comes to the self-defense side of things, same thing. Not just limiting ourselves to kicking, punching, blocking, throwing, all that kind of stuff. We acknowledge that's last resort stuff. But we'll also, and then when you do use it, you have to use it in the right contextual way in line with the goals as well. So it doesn't all transfer over, right? But then you'll look at self-defense in that wider sense. What about personal security? What about lifestyle issues? All that kind of stuff. What about your particular demographic in your location? What is the violent crime that you're most likely to look at? And I love the fact that in the karate circles in which I move, and it's one thing I really do love about it, so I'm putting it in there, even though it may not apply to everyone in karate in a wider sense. But in the karate as I do it, that demarcation is clear. So we practice what needs to be practiced, we teach what needs to be taught, and we can still enjoy all of the martial arts in its wider sense, because we go, okay, that wouldn't be appropriate for self-defense, but it's still great in and of itself. We can still be enthusiastic about it. We can still see the inherent value in it without having to tie it to self-defense. And I sometimes see in the wider martial arts world, people have to tie everything to self-defense, and they often do so in very tenuous, ineffective ways as well. Because that's the gold standard by which everything else is judged. And whereas in the karate community in which I move, we go, no, there's no bearing to self-defense at all. It's a dueling skill, but it's a very effective dueling skill. And we love it because of that. So it's another thing I love about karate as I do it, as I experience it, the karate community in which I move. Okay, let's move on to things I hate about karate. Now again, just as I said at the start, this doesn't apply to all karate. There's lots of differing karates. But one thing I do see a lot of in the karate world, which I really don't like, the wider karate world, is an adherence to rigid dogma. Now within the karate community which I move, that's not there. That's not there. If something doesn't have demonstrable value, we'll start to question it, we'll look at it. But in the karate world, you do get an awful lot of dogma. My sensei told me this, so therefore it's true. It's almost like cult-like thinking, where they're not open to any evidence or practical demonstration that what they're talking about may be incorrect. So, I'm not going to get into it again, but the example of pulling an empty hand to your hip is there because it adds power to the punch. It's dogma. It does not, demonstrably does not, add any power to the punch. I've had that discussion to death, and I put a video about 4 years ago saying, okay, show me. Let's end the debate, show me. Anyone who believes that pulling an empty hand to your hip, show me hitting something, and show me how you can get more power with an empty hand on your hip than with a hand somewhere else. And do you know how many takers I've had for that? 0. None. So people will argue it dogmatically. I'm still open, by the way. If you want to make that video and show it, I'm happy to see it. But people will argue it because they have that adherence, that dogma. Historically, we see that hand on the hip in the cat, as it was grabbing something, it was doing something. It's well documented. Funakoshi, Taguchi, Mabuni. It's historically there. And it makes much more sense pragmatically if you understand that when the hand's on the hip, there's something in it when we're doing that stuff. If we're doing it solo, then of course the hand's empty. But we're still visualizing and thinking about gripping something. So there's that there. There's that kind of dogma. And strange, like heels is another one. The heel should always be down because that gives you more power. It doesn't. You know what I mean? Sometimes, yes, you need both feet flat on the ground because you need stability in certain situations. But in certain situations where stability is not pressing at that moment, you can take your heel off and you can rotate your hip a bit more and you can hit a bit harder, which we see in kata. You know, that there are techniques in kata where the back heel is off the floor. People are very inconsistent with the thinking about it. But you do see a lot of it. I could go on and on and on, but that's one thing that I really don't like about karate in its wider sense. We need to be more open. So as a whole, so if somebody shows us something, and then we can demonstrably say, oh, maybe what I've been doing isn't optimum to this point. You know, maybe there's something I haven't considered here. The fact that some people just go, la, 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 I'm not listening. You know, this is what my sensei said, and therefore this is correct, is problematic. It leads to stagnation. It stops the art improving, which is not good for the art. None of the old masters wanted that. Not a single one of them. You know, wanted karate to stay exactly the same and unchanging. You read Funakoshi's stuff in Karate Do My Way of Life. You know, it talks about how important it is that karate continues to change and evolve, right? All of them did. You know, so this grabbing onto things, these dogmatic ideas and holding on to them for grim depth, it's not because those ideas are great. It's because you're overly invested in your art being perfect. Right? And you're overly wrapped up and you're not looking at it objectively. So it's one thing I don't like about karate is its adherence to rigid, demonstrably false dogma. A related one perhaps, but another thing I don't like about karate is the way that so much misinformation is ingrained. So, you know, we see the practical things I've already talked about, but we also see it with historical things as well. How many karateka think that karate had its dim and distant origins in the Shaolin Temple, despite that myth being demonstrably false? You know, how many karateka believe that, you know, we break wood because the samurai used to wear wooden armor? It's demonstrably false. How many karateka believe it was a peasant's art? Practiced by the oppressed Okinawans, you know, to help deal with their samurai oppressors because of the weapons ban, which banned swords and guns, right? Not other weapons. We have kata for sai, tonfa and bow and stuff, right? They were still practicing weapons. And if you look at the social classes that most of the masters came from, they were the higher classes, because they had the time and the money to learn martial arts, and there was a social status for them in learning martial arts, right? We've got people who are hanging about in the castle with the king, right? You know, these aren't peasants. So the misunderstanding of it, but it gets so ingrained that people just regard it, you know, as demonstrably true. And when they're inventing new ones all the time too. You know, you see all kinds of stuff, you know, like you know, some of the moves in the kata are designed to be used with weapons, but we do it empty-handed because of the weapons ban. No, we don't. No, we don't. You know, look at the history, understand what the weapons ban actually was. And if you're learning to use a weapon, put the weapon in your hands. You don't do it empty-handed. It makes no sense to do that. Right? And as again, we have kabudo katas. We have these katas that show you how to use the weapon. How did they survive and get through? You know, there's lots of this stuff that people hear and they just go, yep, okay, that seems right. Let's run with that. Or I read that in a karate book once. Let's run with that. That the numbers of the katas have deep spiritual numerology significance. No, they don't. You know, no, they don't. You know, there's lots of things are in threes in katas because threes are an important spiritual number. No, they're not. You know, I mean, we go on and on and on with this stuff, and I could do a whole video debunking all of that. But that's one of the things I really don't like about it, is people hear something and then all of a sudden it becomes fact. And it's not just things that have been passed on for, you know, decades and decades. As I say, people are inventing new ones all the time. There's a lot of karate history that we don't know and will never know, right? It's lost. It's lost to history. And I think the right answer in those cases is we don't know. You know, so what does the name of this kata originally mean? We don't know. It's an Okinawan pronunciation of Southern Chinese dialects, and we don't know. We'll never know what it means originally. We'll never know what the kanji was. But people will take a guess and go, it sounds a bit like that in modern Japanese. Therefore, it means this. We don't know. And we don't know is a perfectly acceptable, which is why Funakoshi in Shotokan gave them new names, right? He recognized this problem, that some of the names and meanings are lost to history. So that's one of the things that gets me, this persistence of false information within karate, and then developing new myths all the time. So, the way we counter that is we go, well, what's the source for this? And it can't just be, I read it on the internet. Or, somebody told me that. We need to, get good information to become part of karate. And the wonderful thing about that is, as well, as it becomes much more rich as a tradition when you do that. The real history is way more fun and interesting than the pseudo-history that kind of comes on. The pseudo-history is part of the history. We need to look at, well, why did people say that? Why did people say that karate had a strong link to Buddhism when it demonstrably does not? The opening line of Itosu's 10 precepts, karate did not come from Buddhism or Confucianism. Right? It's there. We can see that it didn't. Right? But nevertheless, people like to reinvent this because it sounds cool. These ideas, these monks learning this fighting art and then passing it on. But the fact that people are saying, why are they saying that? And they're saying it because it sounds cool and helps promote the art and all that kind of stuff. And that's part of the history. But we have to acknowledge it's not true. So yeah, that's one thing I really don't like about karate, this persistence of ingrained misinformation and the development of new misinformation. The final one that I'm going to look at in this video is this insistence that there's one right karate and it happens to be the one that we do. That's really, really common. I always point this out. How lucky are you? How lucky are you that you walked into the only dojo in the world that's doing it right? As a beginner who had no knowledge of the karate or the martial arts, you walked into the one dojo in the world that does it right, with all the other ones being a substandard abomination, right? Doesn't hold up to scrutiny if you look at it. The fact is, there's lots of differing karates, different styles, approaches. They have certain broad themes. They all, come through the island of Okinawa, and there's a lot of commonality with them. But there's no doubt, as I said about this, that there's lots of differing karates which are all equally valid in their own way. If you're talking about functional skills, you just test it. Does it work or not? There's your measure, There's assistance to sometimes purity of style. And we're the ones that are doing it right. I call that artificial success criteria. So if you're looking at a martial art, how do you know if it's successful? Well, is it achieving the goals you want to achieve? And that'll vary a little bit from person to person. If you went to karate because you wanted it to be fun and you want a fun form of exercise, and the way you're training is fun and it's keeping you fit, your karate's right. It doesn't matter if it works or not, because you don't care about that. Right? If you want to compete and you want to be successful in competition, if you're winning lots of medals, if you're winning lots of tournaments, your karate is right. What you're doing is right for your objective. If your aim is to have some self-defense based skills, so if the worst happens, you've got some functional skills to back it up, well, we can test that. We can create live drills that recreate real violence, and we can see if we're successful at that. And if we are, then that's great. But I think this idea of going, is it pure? Is artificial. Because there never was one karate that all the others have evolved from. There's always been lots of them. Like Funakoshi said, talking about kata, there are not now, nor have there ever been, any hard or fast rules regarding the performance of kata. It is therefore not surprising they vary with time and even from instructor to instructor, said Gichin Funakoshi, who's regarded as the father of modern karate, right? A guy who instrumental in helping spread it. It was there on Okinawa and knew all the key players. He says, yeah, they all did it different. So how do you know if yours is good or not? Well, you measure it against the criteria that you're trying to achieve. But people do get very dogmatic about it. You'll see, one person does a kata on the hands here, the next person does a kata on the hands there, and they'll go, oh, those blasphemers, the hand should be here, they've got the hand there. Oh my word, that's terrible. Do they not know? There's lots of different karates. And again, I think just opening yourself up to that fact makes it fun. Go and have a look at them all as well. It's something I love doing. I do the katas exactly as they were taught them by my instructor, because they're fine as they are. They serve the purpose nicely. I don't see any need to alter or tweak any of them or anything like that. They're fine. But when I go to my friends' dojos who maybe do the katas a little bit differently or from different styles, I see the same things going on. I always say the styles are largely like the font in which the message is written. Shotokan katas are written in a Shotokan font, and Shitoryu, it's a Shitoryu font, But in terms of the actual information within them, it's largely the same information. As Mabuni said, there are no styles of karate, only varying interpretations of its principles. There's common principles within there. But this idea that there's only one right way, and it happens to be the way that you do it, and that they do it, yeah, that's a problem. And you do see an awful lot of that. And I don't think you need to study every single version of karate, but you should have some familiarity with it. I was lucky that way that my instructors would always encourage that. They would have friends who did other styles, and they would get them into teacher stuff, and we'd see how other ones do stuff, and we'd realise, yeah, it's a bit different, but it's really good. I like why they do that. I can follow the reasons why they do that. And certainly when it comes to the katas, because when we talk about things like Shotokan kata, Wado kata, Shitoryu kata, Goju kata, it's the wrong way around, right? Because the katas existed before the styles. A long time, in some cases, a long time before those style names came in. The katas don't evolve from Shotokan. What we had is, we had katas, and then what we should be saying is, this is the kata as performed in Shotokan. This is the kata as performed in Shitoryu. The katas have been around a lot longer, and by looking at all the ways in which it's evolved over time, you can look. It's like looking at the same thing but from different angles. You learn a little bit more about it. So this rigid idea that there's one right karate and all others are wrong, we see an awful lot of that. But it's small-minded thinking, and I think it's limiting to both the individual and to the art as well. So there's 3 things I love about karate and 3 things I hate about karate. There are more things that I love and there are more things that I hate. I think the important thing is that you think about these things too. So hopefully there's something in that you think, oh, okay, I'm going to think about that. Or I agree, I disagree. I want to talk to my colleagues about this one. The whole point is to get a conversation going. So I'm into my 5th decade of doing karate now. I've been doing karate since I was a little kid. I've done it over 40 years. I still love it. It's definitely the right martial art for me. I'm not saying it's the best one, because that's a subjective thing, but it's definitely the best one for me. I've done other ones, but karate is the one that appeals the most. I absolutely love it. Great. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be critical of it. Because I love it, I am going to be critical of it, because I want it to be better. In the areas where I can see in my own practice or, the practice of others and that kind of stuff, we should be having conversations about this. How can karate be better? What are we doing that's really good? What should we keep doing more of? What are we not doing enough of and we could do more of? What are we doing too much of and we should maybe stop doing or reduce? These are the things we need to be having conversations about. Just like they always have. That living tradition. So that's when karate will continue to remain relevant. To the modern world. It'll continue to evolve and people continue to enjoy it and benefit from it. We don't serve it if we're not critical of it. It's true of anything, right? The instant you go, this thing cannot be criticized, it's perfect as it is, problems evolve pretty quickly. So we need to be doing the same thing, objectively looking at it, honestly looking at it and saying, okay, what is great? Let's do more of that. What's not so great, let's try and do a little bit less of that, technically, culturally, whatever it happens to be. So I hope this video provides food for thought in that, in your own thoughts about karate. Because I love it. Been doing it, 40 plus years. But I'm not so indoctrinated that I can look at it and go, I can see problems here. We need to remain critical of it. Because I think that's good for karate and it's good for all the karateka as well. Yeah, so thanks for watching.